All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this press briefing. We have a very exciting announcement today with regard to the license plates. Now, by state statute, we have to have a new license plate design every 6 years. And so we are going to unveil today the new license plate design. I want to thank all the team that's been helpful in getting us to this point, starting with my lovely wife, Suzanne Shore, our First Lady, who headed up the project to get the new license plate design, but also Bob Ripley, our capital administrator, who will say a few words in a minute, as well as Rhonda Lamb, who's our director for the Department of Motor Vehicles, who actually mechanizes all this stuff and makes it happen. We're also being joined today by Drew Davies, who is a national or Nebraska brand consultant, and also his wife Elise is here, as well as Digital Sky. So we appreciate everybody who is part of this process. So what I am going to do at this point is I am actually going to turn it over to my wife to talk about the process, and then she'll turn over to Bob, who will turn over to Rhonda. So, honey, it's all yours.
Okay, here we go. So thank you very much. So I have been thinking about this license plate for quite a while. And when Pete was reelected in 2018, I really started putting my thinking cap on, because what I didn't want was for this to sneak up on us and to have to make a hasty decision. So I started talking to several people, and I started with Rhonda Lamb and Betty Johnson in the Department of Motor Vehicles. And what I learned very quickly is this is far more complicated than anyone thinks it is. And I appreciate, more than I can say, Rhonda and Betty walking me through all of this. They answered so many of my questions and tolerated me as I kept trying to push back on things that I just couldn't have, or that we couldn't allow the plate to do. I need everyone to understand that there are legislatively required mandates that go along that affect this general plate that don't affect the specialty plates out there. Those specialty plates basically have no real requirements. They don't even actually have to be readable apparently. But the general license plate is very different than that. We are required to have certain size of letters and numbers and the dash. So that doesn't allow us to do things like shift the position of those, like the Department of Parks and Recs do, where you have the side animal with the box turtle or the sandhill crane. We couldn't do that. We're obligated to use certain colors. We're also obligated to have a certain font size for that in Nebraska, and it has to be positioned in a certain place. So there are lots of limitations that go along with this. I originally thought when we started, you just find a nice, attractive image and you stylishly plop it on that plate and you're ready to go, and I couldn't be more wrong. Then I started talking to a lot of people that I would meet in the creative fields of marketing and digital design, and I encouraged them to consider possible designs that would represent our state. And I emphasized that they needed to be something that represented the entire state and that also embodied the spirit of Nebraska. And over the past couple of years, we've had several people take us up on that offer, and we had about a dozen design options submitted. The design chosen comes from Drew Davies, who happens to be one of the people that I talked to way back when, and who was also one of the most creative and positive people I know. And in 2020, just as the COVID pandemic was hitting, and we were all getting locked down, I had my very first Zoom call with Drew where he showed us these presentations. And I remember that because my poor daughter Margot, that I had drugged back from Northwestern, had to show me how Zoom worked. But it all worked out. And finally, a year and a half after that call, I was able to tell him that the governor had chosen one of his wonderful designs. And I have to say that I wholeheartedly agree with and support this decision. It is a winner. And I would now like to show a video announcing the new Nebraska general license plate. Have you seen this?
I don't know, I've seen it. That's our new license plate design. Yay!
So Drew, thank you so much for this design. I have told you now, again, and I'll tell you over and over again, I think it's marvelous. So thank you so much. Drew chose one of the beautiful mosaics of the Capitol as the inspiration, and this is the genius of creative energy. And if you want, you can walk down the hallway, and just as you start towards the rotunda, you will find it there on the floor. And Drew can speak about the whole process and what he went through during the Q&A if you'd like. And you can ask him how long he's been thinking about this license plate. That would be a very good question to ask. So thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I also want to thank Grant Schlickman and Mark Champion and the folks at Digital Sky for creating that promotional video. Now, Digital Sky is helping us with a much larger project, shooting drone photos and videos of much of the artwork in the Capitol, something that's never been done before. This will provide us with high-resolution images that are currently not available. We're going to utilize those images for a special video, different than the one you just saw, that will be released in conjunction with the license plate in January. And the goals of that are to answer the inevitable questions about what and why when it comes to the license plate, and to highlight the beauty of our incredibly unique Capitol, something that fourth graders who tour the building understand, but the rest of us might not unless we make the effort to come out and visit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Ripley, Administrator of the Capitol, to speak about the genius of creative energy.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Governor and First Lady especially for support of this particular image. It's a great piece of Nebraska fine art held within the state's largest collection of publicly owned art, owned and sponsored by the state of Nebraska and state government in general. We celebrated last month in April of 2022, the 100th anniversary of the process of beginning the design and construction of the current state capitol. This building was called for to be built by Nebraskans, for Nebraskans, and from an architectural competition, a team of 4 individuals were part of the process. They were the design team that depicted and prescribed where everything in the building was to be located. Bertram Goodhue, the architect for the building, was the man who created a unique architectural form for the Nebraska State Capitol. There are no other capitals like ours. There have been others that have had towers since, and so on and so forth, but this was a unique form. And he also prescribed that the building was to speak about Nebraska as a place and about its citizens. There was a team of 4. The next person to really be called out was Dr. Hartley Burr Alexander, who was the thematic consultant for the building, and he was a PhD philosopher and head of that department at the University of Nebraska in the 1920s, and he worked with the entire design team prescribing where artwork would go and in what order. The other members of the team were Lee Laurie, the sculptor for the building, who'd worked with Goodhue a great deal, and in this particular case, Hildreth Mayer, who was the mosaicist for the building. And Alexander prescribed and worked with them through the entire completion of the project. They literally created a huge 3-dimensional walk-in history book about Nebraska, and that is the building. The exterior depict the 3,000 events carved in limestone of the 3,000-year historic events that caused the creation of Western democracy as we know it today, and we practice it in Nebraska. The interior is a focus between Alexander and, in this case, Hildreth Mayer, in creating a mosaic system that tells the story in a very specific chronological order. As I said, the building's like a history book. Chambers within the building are like chapters within the book. I compliment the vision of the First Lady and the team for putting this particular piece of artwork in, because if there is a frontispiece in this giant 3-dimensional history book, this mosaic is it. It's the first picture you see when you walk into the Capitol. It's the image on the floor that summarizes as it says in its name, the genius of creative energy, all the natural forms of the universe shown with this historic charioteer, if you will, kind of holding the reins of this power, without which we do not have. Without this power and all these various forms of energy in the environment, we do not have agriculture and industry in Nebraska or anywhere for that matter. So it is a wonderful symbolic piece of art. It is a very appropriate piece of art to represent our state on all these multitude of vehicles that will be going border to border in Nebraska and well beyond our borders, representing our state. It's a beautiful piece of visual art, and I think it represents Nebraska very well, and needless to say, the capital as well. Now, those of you who know me well know I could wax on and on about this. In deference to the event today and my good friend Rhonda Ham, I'm going to turn the microphone over to her to give you what the heavy lifting of a project like this really involves, the logistics and the production aspect. Rhonda?
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for being here today. The issuance of a new series license plate requires extensive planning and logistics, which have been underway for the last 18 to 24 months. I would like to thank First Lady Suzanne Shore and Mr. Davies for their work in designing the 2023 general issuance plate design. Plate production began earlier this month and will continue through the end of the year to provide adequate inventory in the counties to begin issuing the plates in January of 2023. In addition to the production of the new passenger plates between now and the end of the year, we'll also be producing new commercial, farm, and the other nearly 100 different types of plates, resulting in the printing of over 3 million plates between now and the end of the year. Over the 6-year life cycle of the plate, we're estimating that we will produce nearly 8 million plates. The plates are produced by the Department of Correctional Services as mandated in Nebraska law. The process for replacing the current plate with the new general issuance plate will be similar as past years when the new plate cycle has commenced. Vehicle owners will receive their new plate from their county treasurer's office in the month when their registration expires. Vehicle owners with specialty plates on their vehicles will also be required to replace their plates in the month of expiration. So between now and the end of the year, us, along with the Department of Corrections, are busy placing plate orders and producing plates.
All right, thank you very much, Rhonda, and thank you, Drew and Suzanne and Bob, for all your help in pulling this together. So, as always, we'll go ahead and open up to questions on this particular topic, but I want to again compliment the team for a design that is part of who we are here in Nebraska. You know, this has been something that's been adorning the floor here in the Capitol building for nearly 100 years. So it's cool that we were able to incorporate this into the license plate design and help bring a little bit of the Capitol building all across the state of Nebraska. So with that, let's go ahead and open up to questions. Paul.
Is there a name for this form? Can you better describe? It's a charioteer? Is it a Greek?
So this is called the genius of creative energy. That is what the name of that mosaic is. And Bob, I will let you go into more detail. You want to go into more detail describing it?
Well,
You said it was a...
Governor, you described it perfectly. That is exactly the name for that piece. Each mosaic, pictorial mosaic, set into the floor of the second level from the vestibule to the rotunda, there are 13 such panels, all have individual names, and that is, as the governor said, that's the specific name of this piece, the genius of creative energy.
You don't have a nickname for it, it's like Genie.
We allow that to those who have far greater creative skills than we do in written form.
But it doesn't represent any like Greek mythological character.
The images set into the tile mosaics in general are Roman in character. A lot of artwork developed early in the project was done with more recent figures, such as perhaps even 19th century images. Even the murals in the governor's reception room outside this space were done in more contemporary figures. And it was Dr. Alexander that prescribed that they should be more ancient figures, because all of them are allegories. All of them are people representing ideas, not people representing people, or in some cases, specific historic events. And so, as an allegorical figure, he wanted them to go back in history so far that no one would say, oh, that looks like my great-uncle so-and-so. No, it has to do with representing an idea, and that was the whole concept behind it.
But isn't also part of this is working into the genius of creative energy is that the genius of creative energy is harnessing the 4 elements, right?
Correct.
Air, earth, wind, and fire.
That's exactly correct. And those specific panels, as the governor says, those specific panels are represented in round panels or rotondi on the 4 axes of the rotunda: earth, wind, fire, and water. So those can be found individually. This one is a collective image that speaks of the power of nature and using those forces for the development of what we have as Western civilization today.
So it's not Zeus. It's not any known god. It's just a being. And he's riding on clouds too, by the way. So it's not a chariot. Just, you go down there. It's amazing to look at, and it'll be clearer.
Other questions? Why blue? That's the color of the mosaic. Go take a look at the mosaic. It's
Well, it's
generally
grayish. And
grayish,
was
yeah.
there, and it just toned in right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the tone worked, and as the First Lady said earlier, we have a limited color palette to work with in terms of
Here, Drew, why don't you
specifications.
just go ahead and address that a little?
Yep.
So the question was, why blue?
Yeah, the short answer is we had a limited color palette based on the specifications of what the plate could and couldn't be printed in. And so we honed in on keeping the color palette simple and straightforward to be able to really feature that artwork without detracting from it.
Governor, why do you defer this decision to your wife? Did she pick the color in the living room and stuff?
So Paul's question was, why did I defer this to my wife? Did she pick the colors of the living room? And the answer to that would be yes. So, you know what? Actually, Suzanne had a passion for doing this and wanted to engage different folks in getting the license plate done, and I thought she did a fantastic job. So I was very pleased to be able to have her take this as a project to be able to help us pull this all together.
Will we be able to see some of the also-rans?
The question was, will we be able to see some of the also-rans? I suppose you could if you wanted to, yeah. We could probably get copies of those. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew. Paul was kind of hogging all the questions there, sorry.
I was wondering, as this travels around the country, though, it's not your typical Nebraska license plate. I mean, is that good or bad? And you have to kind of explain what exactly this is, and people might not understand.
So the question was, this is not a typical, this would not be a typical Nebraska scene you might find, for example, that we've had on some of the past license plates. And as this travels around the country, is that a good or bad thing? And I actually think that educating people around the country about some of the things they may not know about Nebraska. I mean, I think a lot of people around the country know Nebraska is an agricultural state, and that's certainly been the theme of many of our license plates in the past. But having them know that we had wasn't one of the 7 architectural wonders of the world at the time it was built, Bob? All right, Bob's willing to go with that one. And just what a beautiful building we have here. We have this type of art that is available for the public to see just about any day of the year. I think that's kind of a cool thing to be able to let people know that we've got things here in Nebraska that you may not expect.
So what's going on in this picture? I mean, I see a shooting star, I see rains, but he's riding on clouds and he's got, what's there in the lower right?
So Fred's asking what is there in the lower right down
Waves.
here. So this is the figure right here, right? You've got kind of lightning behind him. You got the shooting star, and he's holding these reins. So, but at the end of the day, Fred, it is the genius of creative energy. So it represents that idea. And again, you can look in our state, and you can see that all across the state. I mean, our ag producers, for example, are all small business people that look to be able to find solutions to problems every day to be able to feed a growing world. Center pivot irrigation, for example, would be one example of how we've impacted the world tremendously. And I'd certainly encourage everybody to go, again, just a short walk from here to just go around starting toward the rotunda, and you'll be able to see the full-scale mural that's sitting right in the floor of our Capitol building, available every day. Andrew.
Suzanne, were you at all scared or intimidated about the slings and arrows that people shoot at people that design license plates?
Repeat the question.
Drew. No, because
So
Drew's a
repeat the
good.
question.
Oh, am I concerned about the feedback that might come back that might be critical? And I have a good teammate in Drew, and we have complete confidence in each other that this was a great design. I think it's incredibly unique, and I'm willing to stand behind it. It is inevitable that there's going to be criticism. It's sort of a state sport in every state to criticize the license plate. I'm from Oklahoma, and boy, when they change theirs, you hear about it from my parents and everyone else. So it's not unique to Nebraska. But I think time will show that this will become a very beloved license plate. I certainly hope so.
This is Nebraska artwork, it's not like Michigan's.
It is truly from our capital. You walk right down there and look at it.
All right, any other questions on the license plate?
How does Hildreth pronounce her last name?
How does Hildreth pronounce her last name? Mayer?
Mayer.
Mayer.
As in breathing my air, so to speak.
Hildreth Mayer, the
M-A-I-E-R.
muralist. And I might point out, she also has designs in the National Cathedral as well as the National Arts and Humanities.
Well, and Drew knows all about
Yeah.
that.
No, you want to just step up for that?
Yeah, one of the most exciting things about this piece is Hildreth Mayer's stature in the art world. She sort of broke the glass ceiling as a female artist in a world dominated by males, and this was one of her, the entire Capitol Commission was one of her very first pieces that kind of launched her onto the national stage. And so she...
You can go to her website.
yeah,
There's a great website on her.
it's a whole collection of great work that she's done
Can you just
over
list off some
60
of the
years.
other places? Do you remember some
Yeah,
of the other
and,
places?
right, Radio City Music Hall, the most famous, those relief sculptures on the outside of Radio City Music Hall, she's famous for, and a collection of other places across New York City and Washington, D.C. is where the primary set of her work is.
Yeah, Paul.
Maybe ask Drew, there are hundreds of images in the Capitol, why were you drawn to this?
So repeat the question too, please.
Yeah, Paul asked, there's hundreds of images in the Capitol, why this one? And you're exactly right, you can't look in any direction in this Capitol without seeing a beautiful piece of art, sculpture, mosaic, paintings and the like. This one, Bob touched on this. It's like the crown jewel of all of those pieces. It was intended as the thing you see when you walk into the primary entrance of the Capitol that leads you through all of these other pieces of artwork. And in addition to that, just its symbology that we talked about earlier makes it this perfect piece as a representative of every Nebraskan. So I love this piece as a symbol and allegory towards the creative potential and power of all Nebraskans, how we celebrate creativity in the past, present, and future in our state. And so that image speaks to all of those pieces and makes it really the perfect piece for displaying on license plates across the state.
All right, anybody else on this topic? All right, seeing none, well, that was a great job of explaining that, Drew. Thank you very much, appreciate it. And thank you, Bob, for being here to help talk about the Capitol building. Rhonda, thank you so much for your work in the Department of Motor Vehicles. And of course, Suzanne, thank you very much for heading up this project to get it all pulled together. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, well, now we're going to go ahead and open up to other questions and answers. So as we covered before, Drew, you don't have to stay up here for this one. So, all right, other questions? Yeah, Paul.
Wants to raise their hand,
You might as well start us off, Paul.
Yeah, you've had a series of town halls, talking about the, progress you're able to achieve in the legislative session. None of these town halls are ever in Omaha or Lincoln.
So Paul asked the question is, why do we do town halls across the, or why, when we do town halls across the state, do we not do them in Omaha or Lincoln? Well, I mean, for one example, right here, we've got a number of folks that are here today that have access here in the Lincoln's Capitol to all the news media and so forth. Same thing in Omaha. You've got lots of news media that cover what's going on. What I find is that when you get outside of Omaha and Lincoln, you don't have the same media coverage. And so that's why it's important that I get out and do that. Plus, I do a lot of events both in Omaha and Lincoln where people have access to me. Not as many in other parts of the state, so that's why we do town halls in different parts of the state.
Maybe concerned about protests or backlash?
So the question is, do we are concerned about protests or backlash? And I got to tell you again, I do a number of events, both in Lincoln and Omaha, and it really hasn't been an issue. Yeah, Andrew.
Governor, anything more on the baby formula situation and how are is this formula actually getting to Nebraska?
So the question was, any more on the baby formula situation? And as I mentioned in the past, the federal government really isn't communicating with us on this. So I know that they've opened up to be able to start taking imports. I know that we got a shipment into Indianapolis. But as far as the federal government's communication with us, it's really been zero on this. So I don't really have any additional information to provide you.
Have you reached out to the president or the president's administration about, I guess, getting more communications and whether or not Nebraska's going to get any of this formula?
Well, as an administration, we've often asked for the administration to give us more information on things. So, but we haven't received anything more from the administration on this part. Other questions? Paul?
Do you think an 18-year-old should be able to buy an AR-15?
So the question was, do I think an 18-year-old should be able to buy a rifle, an AR-15 in particular is what Paul asked about. And I would say in the state of Nebraska, the answer is absolutely yes.
Why is that?
Well, most people are, the question, Paul, is why is that? Well, most people here in Nebraska are law-abiding citizens. And we ought not to focus on the gun, but the person who's pulling the trigger. That's where the real problem lies. And that's why I've said we got to get at the root cause of this, which is looking at mental health care. In fact, there was a study out last year from Stanford University that looked at 35 of these mass shooters and determined 28 of them had untreated mental health care problems, for example. And so that's why, for example, in our ARPA budget, we put $40 million in for expanding mental health care services, another $5 million to encourage people to go into the behavioral health field and nursing field. We've got the money we allocated to UNK, for example, to make sure it's not just in Lincoln and Omaha. We've had additional things with regard to our system of care, where we have taken our grants to be able to help expand mental health care. We were piloting our open access right now, and open access beds, so that we can make sure that people who need that mental health people can get more readily connected with it. Later this summer, actually in July, we're going to be rolling out the 988 National Helpline for people with mental health care needs to be able to call and get a hold of a counselor right away. So there's a number of steps that we're taking. And of course, Department of Health and Human Services has worked with the Department of Education on training more folks in schools. In fact, last year we had 943 people were trained on mental health first aid to be able to help do early interventions with people who will need that help. We need to focus on the person, and that's what we've been doing here in Nebraska. And U.S. News and World Report actually says we've got the third best mental health care in the state, or in the country.
Wouldn't red flag laws do that? If you want to focus on somebody who's disturbed or having a mental break, wouldn't that prevent somebody with a mental break from getting a gun?
So Paul is asking about red flag laws, and again, I would point out that those are not perfect. For example, New York has a red flag law. But also, just in general, when you think about it, this is a constitutional right, so it's a pretty high bar to restrict it, and you have to go to court to restrict anybody's rights. So you have to go to court. People have to have due process if you're going to restrict their rights. Yeah, Andrew.
Would restricting the, those types of weapons, I guess assault-style weapons, are they effective? If you reduce it, to a higher age or 21, do you think they would be effective?
So Andrew's asking the question is, if we put additional gun laws in place, do you think that would be effective? And I'd point out Cook County, Illinois, has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country and one of the highest murder rates in the country as well. So I actually don't think those things would be effective. Chicago's pretty much proved they're not effective.
Is there any rationale for the age limit? I mean, would you be at all, I guess, open to making this age limit be limit when you can buy alcohol, to 21?
So the question was, we limit other things like alcohol to 21. And again, as I said, here in our state of Nebraska, I think 18 is an appropriate age with regard to somebody's ability to buy a rifle.
One more question?
I guess I was speaking more about high-powered rifles that were designed for military use.
So Paul is asking, well, what about high-powered rifle designed for military use? So what are the qualifications for that, Paul? And that's the whole thing. People talk about assault rifles, but they can't really tell me what that is. What does an assault rifle mean? How do you define it? A gun that's sold to the military? Okay, so so what does that mean, Paul? Because you can sell any gun to the military. You can sell handguns. The military buys handguns. Does that mean they're assault rifles now? Okay, so Paul, again, that's the whole point. Like you throw up all these red herrings about how to restrict people's gun rights, but we actually have to focus on what is the root cause, and that gets back to the person who's disturbed and does terrible things, like what we saw down in Texas. We got to focus on how do we have better interventions? How do we get to those people who need that help? That's where we really need to put our focus.
Are you supportive of the legislative committee that's being formed to look into security in schools?
And Paul's asking about the a legislative committee that's being formed to look into the security of schools. And again, I think we can always look at all of our processes to see how we can improve upon them. I think there was an article actually in the Omaha World Herald that talked about the Department of Education, the steps that have been taken so far. I mentioned some of the ones that we've done with the Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Education to train 943 people in mental health first aid. So there may be other ways that we can improve upon these processes. So absolutely, we should always be looking to see how we can improve things.
Just a question about the tragedy that happened in Lincoln with the accident. I guess any comment on that as far as the people that were hurt?
So Andrew's asking about the horrible car accident that we had in Lincoln where 2 people died and 19 were injured. And again, we're just praying for all the families and want the families who lost their loved ones there to know that we're very sorry about that and that we just keep them in our thoughts and prayers and pray for the recovery of all those who are injured.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, folks. Have a great day.